What up, what up, what up? Welcome back to Lockdown Universe, home of the bizarre, peculiar, and unheard of stories of UFO legend and paranormal lore. Welcome back, welcome back. Happy to be back. Hopefully, you guys are doing well and taking care of yourselves. Welcome back. Happy to be back. This is a great day. Hopefully, you guys are having a great Sunday and enjoying yourselves in this overly surveilled, crazily populated, um, very much mismanaged world of ours. But anyway, welcome back, welcome back. We are in the thick of it. You think that we are highly evolved and ahead of the medieval times people? No, we're not. We're not ahead of the people who lived in the 1500s, even though we're in what are we in? 2026. I was going to say 2200s. We're in the 2000s. So we're not. Okay, and let me tell you why we're not. Today's podcast is going to be about how the government has bombarded the population with different experiments, and we might very well be in many of them right now. So let's take a look at this. I was listening to a podcast about HIV and how HIV could have been genetically engineered to target black and gay populations and drug users. And what I found was interesting. And I thought, well, I know about many different projects that have happened over the years that have targeted different populations similar to those. So I wanted to do a podcast on that as well as other programs which might be targeting the population right now, such as voice to skull technology, weather manipulation, and thought reading as well, which is a very new concept, but very, very appropriate for today. So let's talk about it. So, you know what's wild is that some of the most disturbing conspiracy theories of all time have turned out to be true, and not just theories, they were actually declassified over time. And today we're going to talk about how the government looked at its own citizens and said, hey, let's just see what happens with this project. Let's take our poor folks, our black communities, our poor white communities, our mentally ill folks, and just throw some experiments at them and see what sticks. Kind of like taking a bunch of spaghetti and throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? Right, exactly. So we'll talk about a couple different projects that most people know about, but maybe some people haven't heard about, and we'll just go through them real quick. So, you guys have heard of the Tuskegee experiment. That one happened in 1932. A, a group of public health service recruits of 399 black men in rural Alabama were poor, sharecroppers mostly, and they were told that they were being treated for bad blood. It was a local term used for basically a whole range of ailments, okay? And they were like, yeah, we're going to get free treatment? Hell yeah, because treatment was expensive. You had to pay for it back then, you still do today. But they weren't being treated for anything. They had syphilis, and the government watched. Um, for 40 years, they tracked the disease as it progressed through their bodies and through their hearts and through their brains and bones. So it basically gave them syphilis. And when the men were drafted in World War II, the draft board tried to treat them, but the Public Health Service basically said, no, you're not going to treat them. Isn't that fucking crazy? So they were being part of this dark government project, being monitored for having syphilis and how it affected their bones and how it affected everything else. And they were trying to figure out, I don't know, how to cure it or what it would do to the population. Maybe they were going to use it for, like, I don't know, eugenics. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But, like, why would they need to see specifically in 399 black men why they were going to use it? So 40 years, in 1972, a whistleblower finally came out named Peter Buxton and leaked it to the press. By then, 28 men had died from the syphilis, 100 more had complications, of course. 40 wives were infected, 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. So, like, obviously bad shit was going to happen. Government settled for $10 million. Dollars. Crazy. Crazy. So, anyway, that's just the first one. We'll talk about HIV because it is similar to that syphilis experiment because HIV seems to target the black population, the homosexual population, and the drug users. So we want to look at that and see why. Why does it target that? And the podcast I listened to gave us some scientific explanations for why it did. So we'll go to that. But this one's really important. This is something, this particular project coming up called um, the San Francisco Bay bacteria spread, Operation Sea Spray, uh, is something that I believe could be happening very, very much today. So I want to talk about that one. So let's talk about it. So in 1950, San Francisco Bay, the U.S. Navy sprays a bunch of clouds of bacteria. Okay, and the bacteria was Serratia marsens and Bacillia globuligi over the city from a vessel called the USS Repertoire. And what's interesting about that is that the stated purpose was to simulate a biological weapons attack. Okay. So, in that, when you think about a biological weapons attack, it is important to know how we're going to respond and how the body would respond. But you don't want to spray your own population with it, right? Well, let's see. Were those bacteria harmful? Let's take a look. They didn't tell anyone. Hundreds of thousands of people breathed it in, and within days, 11 patients were admitted for a rare Serratia infection, which is the bacteria that they spread. A bacteria that's basically never seen in clinical settings ever before. One man, Edward Nevin, did die, and the Army later admitted to conducting the test. Over 200 open air biological tests on American cities between 49 and 69. 20 years, dude, that's crazy. Minneapolis, St. Louis, New York City subway system. They specifically targeted subway systems because that's where a lot of bacteria would spread, or a virus. In New York, they released what they called harmless simulants, not stimulants, simulants, into the subway by dropping light bulbs filled with bacteria onto the track. That's fucked up, man. So the government said, hey, this is a great idea. In New York City, let's test out the bacteria and let's put it into a bunch of light bulbs, place it on the track so it'll get crushed, and then spread up into the air, and let's see what happens to the population. The Army's position is that the bacteria was basically harmless. And again, this is Operation Sea Spray, although it happened in many different non-sea areas such as New York uh, and Minnesota. But they said that this bacteria was harmless. Independent researchers have disputed that for decades. So, what about any other projects? Well, we know that we've gotten bombarded by a whole bunch of bad shit, including the MK Ultra experiment. Now, you probably don't need me to tell you about MK Ultra, so I won't go into detail about it too much. But what I find is interesting, and I might do a podcast about this, is that MK Ultra was created in 53 and ran to 73 and was made to do mind control, made to see if we could create a mind control project. The goal was to manipulate human behavior. Now, what's interesting is they did it back then. They had them watching all this violent shit on television. They locked them into a chair. They pumped them full of drugs, and they found out whether or not they could get them to do what they wanted them to do. Isn't it interesting that now we have algorithms specifically designed to show us a bunch of horrible shit? So if you're interested in negative, I don't know, black on white crime, or you're interested in how drugs work, or how anything works that's bad, right? How even like the police and ICE and all this horrible shit that's going on. If you're interested in that, the feed will feed it to you continually. It's fucking horrible, and it's making people go crazy. So it's the government that's making people nuts. They already figured it out. These companies might have had it disseminated out to them so that they could use it to give it to you. How fucked up is that? Now, if you're a good enough person to be like, oh, I just love gardening and that's my favorite thing. Well, most men aren't like that. Maybe females are like that, and they're like interested in like peaceful outlets for their desires. Most men are looking for aggression, and they're looking for a way to out that aggression. Luckily, I've kind of moved past that in my older years, but in your younger years, you're like, the UFC is great, sports are great, American football is great. Something that bashes into each other. And America isn't even the worst ones. I mean, there's a sport. I think it's called like one hit or something like that, and it's like really popular in like New Zealand and the islands, where two guys run at each other full force, no gear, no football gear or anything on, and they try to hit each other as hard as they can. Whoever gets knocked out loses. Whoever's still standing wins. It's fucking crazy. So that's kind of along the same lines as this MK Ultra experiment. Could they continually fuck us up enough to mind control us, mind fuck us, And those who didn't fall into it, maybe they became successful, maybe they helped out the government. You know what I mean? But I'll cover a couple things with the MK Ultra experiment. They dosed people with LSD, not volunteers, CIA operatives. Would spike the drinks of colleagues, strangers at bars, sex workers, mental patients, prisoners. A CIA scientist was dosed without knowledge in 53. 9 days later, he fell or was pushed off the New York hotel, ruled as suicide. Um, yeah, I mean, like all crazy shit happens. Sensory deprivation experiments, they lock you into a chair, prolonged isolation, electroconvulsive therapy, beyond any therapeutic threshold. Experiments conducted in Montreal, outside of the United States, erased patients' personalities through drug induced sleep lasting weeks. And psychic driving, playing recorded messages on loop to implant new behaviors. Like that's it right there. They played something on loop to implant new behaviors. Say that you're not aggressive towards anything, right? You're interested in peaceful means, but all of a sudden, whatever you're watching continually shows you negative patterns of what's going out in the world, right? You start to think, holy shit, the entire world is going crazy and I need to do something about it. You start to think, oh well, I should join this group, or I should join this group, or I should I should protest, or I should do this. And the fact is that they're pushing all these videos into you, making you think the entire world is that way when it's not. It's just a small portion of it. And that small portion starts to invade your brain like a cancer, and then you can't get away from it because all you do is get back on your phone. And it's this MK Ultra experiment played out in real life, both on social media, uh, and others in quote unquote real news. So it's very fascinating. In 73, CIA director ordered the destruction of the MK Ultra files. What we know comes from about 20,000 documents that were misfiled and survived. Interesting. And that's an incomplete record. Okay. So these are multiple different experiments that have happened against the population and their own populations, CIA's populations. Um, there were Cold War radiation experiments that happened on thousands of American citizens. We know about that. We have, the Bikini Atoll, the nuclear blasts. People lived there for like thousands of years, ate poisoned fish. There's even Operation Northwoods, where some military advisors to JFK decided that it would be a good idea to create this operation where we would attack basically American population somewhere in America, multiple places maybe even. And if they did that, they would blame it on Cuba and Fidel Castro, and that would give them the reason to go attack Cuba and take it over. Instead, JFK said, fuck you, we're not doing that, and we're going to do it the right way. Well, I don't know, whatever right way war is, but he said we weren't going to do that. But it is interesting to know that that kind of thought process occurs in military operations, because not only were they caring about the military operation, they were also considering how we as as an American population would would back this war. If we didn't back the war, then would they have a problem? Does the military care about that? They're not elected in, but the president's elected in, Congress is elected in. So did they have some effect there, right? It's kind of interesting. So let's look at let's look, let's look at COVID now for an example. So COVID, everybody said, "Oh no, it came from a bat that was infected in a wet market," and that's there's no other way it could have came out. Well, the CIA did their own investigation and found out that it came from that Wuhan laboratory, the Wuhan laboratory that basically created gain of function viruses, and that it came out of there somehow. And that was their conclusion. That's the CIA's conclusion. Now, they could be making it up, they could be bullshitting us, but at the same time, nobody believed that it came from a wet market, and nobody believed it could spread that fast or be that deadly either. Um, so, anyway, so these viruses, like COVID, man, the first time I got it, I was annihilated, and I did go to the hospital. I did survive it, but not everybody was so lucky. And people will say, "Oh, I got COVID and it wasn't nothing." Well, good for you. But there's a lot of people that are, really susceptible to it, and they did die, and it was like 2% death rate. It's like, and people are like, "Oh, that's not a big deal." That is a big deal. That's a big deal. Anything with, I mean, a cold has a 0% death rate. So anything that has a 2% death rate is not good. Um, and a lot of people have long-term effects from it now. And this was a laboratory created virus that fucked everybody up for the rest of their life. It's never going to go away. So let's take a look at HIV and neglect and the politics of who dies and who lives. So we'll be careful here, right? We're not going to say HIV was created by the government because there is no definitive evidence, of a whistleblower coming out and saying that or whatever. But the scientific evidence is clear and we want to look at it. So, what happened? They say it came from chimpanzees to humans, probably in Central Africa and probably in the early 20th century. But some believe and some state that it was called SIV at the beginning, simian immunodeficiency virus, right? So it was from simians, it was affecting simians, quote unquote, that they believe, and then it somehow came into our population. So HIV basically, when this is from the evidence base, HIV began killing a lot of gay men in 1981. The Reagan administration's response was silence for years. Reagan didn't publicly say the word AIDS until 1987. By then, over 20,000 Americans were dead, and the press secretary even laughed about it in the press briefings. That's crazy. Now, see, in the 70s and 80s, when you look at the gay populations, there was a lot of opening up and coming out in that time frame. A lot of gay clubs were opening up. Hell, even Jeffrey Dahmer was going to the gay clubs. I mean, that was in the late 80s and early 90s. So we have a lot of people coming out, a lot of people sharing partners, and those people sharing partners. And there was no reason to use protection because nobody was going to get pregnant in those populations. So there was a lot of people that were just saying we're gonna do this. Is it possible that the government said, "Hey, you know what? This goes against our Christian values, and we're gonna take it out. And while we're taking them out, let's see if we can take out another population that we don't like." We know that the government had a hit for MLK, right? And we think they had a hit out for JFK too. So you can see where this goes. But let's keep going. So the CDC was actively tracking it. The NIH in UK also knew. Researchers were screaming for funding. Obviously, the black community was also simultaneously hit hard. Okay, um, they faced compounded barriers though because they didn't trust the medical system, so they didn't want to go in and get it. The Tuskegee experiment meant a lot of people avoided testing. There weren't a lot of clinics in the black communities, so they got late diagnosis, and there was also a crack epidemic intersecting with this time with the needle sharing that created cross vectors of the monitoring of symptoms and the monitoring of the disease spread. So today, Black Americans represent roughly 40% of new HIV diagnoses, despite being 13% of the population. That is an interesting key factor there. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a policy outcome, is what they state. Policy outcomes have more information. So basically, here's here is what connects all of this. We're looking at like all of these different outcomes. So when we're talking about, this is something I gathered from another podcast. When you look at HIV and how it was spread, um, it was spread faster through anal sex versus vaginal sex. The the way that the virus receptors were mostly compounded they could take in more viruses in the anus versus the vagina. So vaginal sex wasn't spreading it as much. Anal sex could spread it faster because the vectors were there to grab those the viruses and spread it throughout the body. The fastest way you could get AIDS was to get a blood transfer as well. So people that needed a blood transfusion, those were the folks that got it the fastest. It was a 92.5% chance you would get HIV if you got a blood transfusion with HIV in it, since they didn't know much about HIV at the time, and it took them a while to understand it. Lots of people kept getting transfusions from HIV infected blood. So you have a lot of factors that made it easier for these populations to acquire HIV and thus acquire AIDS and thus pass away. Now, even today, 2026, 20% of the population in some African countries in sub-Saharan Africa have HIV. Are they able to clear it? Not without the right mixture of medications, which we do have here in America. But they still cost, and they're not being spread over to Africa. So what connects all of this info together? Every single program we basically talked about shares a common feature in the fact that the subjects were people the system decided maybe didn't fully count, maybe didn't count towards their agendas, right? Black sharecroppers, mental health patients that were a drain on the system. Believe me, I know because I've seen it. Worked in that population. There's huge mental health centers in many different states that shut down, and where they go to be homeless basically, unless they can get in like a residential program. But I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people that got closed down on during, what is it? Let's see. Yeah, it was during the Obama administration actually. So people want to blame, a lot of other presidents, but that happened during the Obama administration. Um, and it happened during the Bush administration. So it happened under both Republican and Democrat administrations. That's crazy. Um, you think you're voting for one party that's going to protect you. No, no. Because how are they protecting mentally ill people? If Obama, was like, a Democrat, hardcore Democrat, he should not have allowed those places to close. Those places did close in 2008 and 2009. Then later, they were reopened. Some were reopened, not all. Some, partial. So you have, you know what I'm saying? Like, so the Democrats always say, "Oh, we're protecting people. We're protecting people." I'm sure the Republicans say that too. Everybody's saying they're protecting people, but at the end of the day, both administrations of both parties let the public down. You know, um, and of course, the other populations that were susceptible were prisoners. That's crazy because you're already serving time, and you have they're running experiments on you on top of it. And they could run anything they want in those prisons because they're not televised. It's not like you got 24/7 video on what's going on in the prisons. You don't. And they could be shoving let's say there's people that need medications in prison, right? And there's a whole bunch of people that need diabetes medication, and they're saying, "Hey, the diabetes medication that we send to the prison, we're going to put some virus in there. We'll see how it plays out." That could be done. Stuff like that has been done. Crazy things like the Israel pager uh, project where they intercepted a whole bunch of pagers that were going to go to Hezbollah, and they intercepted those pagers. They implanted where the battery was going to be with a tiny explosive. So all those pagers were going out to all these Hezbollah people, and they exploded them all at the exact same time. And when they did that, they took out a whole bunch of Hezbollah people. And that wasn't that long ago. That was like, I don't know, pagers were around what, 25, 30 years ago. They're still around today. But yeah, that kind of stuff happens. Who else was the target? Urban poor who happened to live downwind. People that were using intravenous drugs, both black, white, Hispanic, whoever, purple, doesn't matter. Um, the experiments weren't random. The neglect wasn't random. The populations were chosen because of what? They were calculated. They were calculated. And Tuskegee ran for 40 years, guys. 40 years. Not because no one knew, a whole bunch of people knew about it, but because no one was incentivized to stop it. You have to look at how these medications and medical companies that are incentivized by their shareholders to push medications. And if they can push it fast enough before another company gets wind of it and they get out first, guess what? Whoever's first to the finish line wins. It's just like with Facebook. When Facebook was created, Mark Zuckerberg was pushing against the twins, the Winklevoss twins, to get his program out that he stole out first. Facebook came out first, and the class book program that they were working on for the Winklevoss twins came out. Then Facebook wouldn't have been as popular. You see, these companies and people work against each other. It's fucked up, and it's just for money. So the reason matters, right? Because it's not to spiral you into like helplessness or paranoia, but it's because the distance between the conspiracy theory and declassified history is just often, it's just time. Time is all that matters because it takes time for it to get declassified. People who said the government was experimenting on black men in Alabama were considered paranoid people for decades, right? People who said the CIA was dosing civilians with psychedelics were called lunatics. That's crazy. They're the government. They're supposed to protect us. Well, maybe what about aliens, right? Are they protecting us from aliens? They haven't told us shit about aliens personally, and definitively. If there's a danger there, if they're working with the aliens, which we know they are, maybe they want to tell us about them because maybe that would be detrimental to what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's a whole fucked up scenario. There's documents that will come out. There's documents that continue to come out. So the next time somebody tells you you're crazy for not trusting the government or an institution or some other company, it's worth asking, has this institution earned your trust? Do you know somebody that works there? Do they seem like they like that company? Do they seem like there's not some secret shit going on? I knew somebody that worked for a company, a weapons company, and they wouldn't tell me shit. But it also came off as though they knew they were doing there was some bad shit going on in that company. They're like, I can't tell you I work for that company, but they also, the energy that was coming off of their vibe was there's some sketchy shit going on with that company. So anyway, um, again, I wanted to do a separate podcast about the social media and the algorithms, which I will do. But what do you think? Put your comments in the comments section. Is it possible that HIV was engineered by the government to take out certain populations that weren't serving them and maybe were against them and maybe were costing them money? Possibly. You let me know. You put your comment in the comments section and we'll talk about it. All right. Love you guys. Peace, love, and light. Always follow the light. Always take care of yourselves physically, spiritually, emotionally. Follow through on your hobbies and your goals and your dreams. And as always, continue to question the universe around you. Till next time, guys, take care. Lifetime Universe out. Peace.